Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 85. Well, really, it's kind of like PEP 85B because we tried this last night. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out because Elon Musk's shitty internet screwed it up for everyone. I'm not sorry. I should introduce our guest, Felicity Ruby. Hello, Fleck. Before you say anything, am I right? It was Elon Musk's internet.
Yeah, look, we switched over to Elon Musk's internet and it really didn't serve us last night. We had like tech rage on acid, steroids, and amphetamines last night. Especially me. You were very calm, but I got really in a bit of a tiz. And so we're doing it again tonight while I came up to the city so we could record it properly. Sorry about last night.
Now I'm going to play act like I'm angry, even though I really wasn't last night. You bum, Elon Musk. Stop tooling around with your tweeting about Dogecoin and trying to reenact Total Recall and just concentrate on your internet so we can do podcasts, please. Okay, yes. All right, got that out of the way. It was a great podcast, though, despite the fact that it constantly was interrupted by freezing. It was a great podcast. In fact, arguably, I think you could suggest it was the greatest podcast in the world, and this is merely a tribute. Don't get me singing. You gotta believe me, wish you were there, a matter of opinion. I always like that line, matter of opinion. Anyway, let's meet our special Pepcaster properly though for this midweek bonus Pep, bonus of a bonus really. Felicity Ruby, tell us a little about yourself, Felicity. We tend to haul you in whenever Julian Assange is in a bit of strife, which is often, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a PhD candidate at Sydney University. I'm doing some research on surveillance, and WikiLeaks is one of my case studies. And so are protesters who roll up to Pine Gap and the Bernard Collaery case in Australia. And I can talk about all kinds of things to do with technology and the internet and surveillance, but I'm an old friend of Julian Assange's, and there's been a recent court case, so we thought we'd talk about it, and I'm very happy to be here. I love this podcast. I listen to it religiously, and I watch Planet America, and I'm just always in awe, Chaz, of a couple of things about you. Your ability to condense so much detail is kind of awe-inspiring. And also, you ask excellent questions. And I don't know if you noticed, but almost every episode, one of the guests says, "That's a great question." And they mean it. It's not just off the cuff. So I'm relying on you to ask good questions because I have too much detail about this subject, and you can kind of get into a bit of a tiz sometimes about strange rabbit holes. So I'm going to rely on your good questions and listen hard and try and answer them.
Well, I
certainly
didn't want to interrupt the flow then, because that was sounding really good. That last minute, another hour and a half of that would be fantastic. We probably should talk about something other than me. Before we get on to Julian Assange, which we're going to be talking a fair bit about, because his hearing was last week, I would like to, it would be silly for us to record a podcast on the day of the Virginia election and not mention the Virginia governor's election. So I'm not going to go into too much detail now. We'll be undoubtedly talking about it on Planet America on Friday, and Dave will probably want to weigh in on the podcast as well. But I'll just give you my snap reaction, and you might have a snap reaction as well, Felicity. I don't know.
Well, the Republican won. That's what I realized, that the Republican won, and there was probably some reasons for that. So tell us.
Look, that's spot on analysis so far. Look, obviously the results are still coming in. It's more than 95% precincts reporting, whatever that means. But the Republican Glenn Youngkin is ahead by about 60,000 votes at this point in time. That's definitely going to be enough. He's definitely going to win. I think it's going to come in a little bit from there, maybe another 10,000 or 20,000, but he's got definitely a large enough margin to hold that it may be there's a outside chance it might get close enough that the independent might have mattered in the end. The independent was a lefty independent, and they got about 22,000 votes so far. I'm not sure it'll come in that far, but it's at least potentially possible it could. I think I'll end up probably about 40,000 the margin. Okay, so but whatever. Youngkin won. Okay. Not a big surprise. Youngkin's had the momentum for weeks. I think a lot of the polls suggested he would win. It was going to be very close, but that he would win, which is kind of how it's turned out. Terry Mcauliffe, he's not called Terry McAwful for nothing. He's not a good candidate. Joe Biden is super on the nose. And this is a pretty standard thing that happens in Virginia, that there's a backlash to the incumbent at the time. The only time there hasn't been a backlash to the incumbent for like 40 years was 2013 under Obama. That the second term of Obama, and that was it. Like there's almost always a backlash. That's not unusual. I mean, obviously there'd be a backlash right now as well because Joe Biden is seriously on the nose at the moment. You don't need to be very good at reading polls to know that. What's of more interest to me, and I'm going to come back to Virginia in a second, but what's of more interest to me is the New Jersey race, which was significantly less predictable. Unlike Virginia, Biden won by 10 points. Right, and it looks like Youngkin's going to win by maybe 2 points. Now, in New Jersey, in the last governor's race, Phil Murphy won by 14 points. And at this point in time, he's behind. With 88% of precincts in, he's behind. Now, I think he's going to win. He's only like 1,200 votes behind. It's very, very close. He's been reeling in that margin for about the last 20% of precincts. I think he's going to go past. Most of the people know what they're talking about, which is not me. So it's going to be a relatively clear win in the end. Like when I say clear, I mean 1 or 2%. I don't mean 5%. But still, Murphy won by 14 points in the last election. New Jersey's a very blue state, much bluer than Virginia is. Yep. So what that tells me, what do we conclude from that? Because I think we should interpret both results at the same time. What we conclude from that, I think, is that races have been fairly nationalised, and this is a backlash to Joe Biden and the Democrats at the moment. I think that's pretty clear. There's a lot of talk about critical race theory and education and stuff, all the things that were prominent in the Virginia race. None of those things were prominent in the New Jersey race. In Virginia, Terry McAuliffe was desperately trying to tar Glenn Youngkin with the stain of Donald Trump. Phil Murphy tried that a bit as well, but not nearly as much. So they were completely different situations, the two races, yet they both involved huge swings to Republicans. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a sign that it's a national reaction. I should also say that that's noteworthy that Youngkin, I don't know too much about the New Jersey race with polling because there wasn't much polling because people just assumed the Democrat would win by a long way. But there was a lot of polling in Virginia, and Youngkin made his move at the same time as Biden was flying down in the polls. So that suggests to me that it is directly related to Biden. Although, as I said, Terry McAuliffe is far from an impressive candidate. Like he's sort of a classic kind of Clintonian kind of slimy corporate kind of a guy that doesn't really inspire the lefties to turn out to vote, generally speaking. Okay. This, of course, as well, has happened before, and you always like to look for history for this kind of stuff. Back in 2009, very similar situation. Obama was losing popularity rapidly at this point in time, not nearly as much as Biden has, but the gradient was the same. In 2009, Obama went from winning Virginia to 6 points to Rob McDonnell, the Republican, won the governorship by 17 points in 2009. So that goes to show you how much bluer Virginia has become in the last 12 years. That this, by all rights, should have been a similar kind of smashing because Terry McAuliffe's a bad candidate. Biden's even more on the nose than Obama was at the time. The legislative mashup that is the Build Back Better agenda is just as embarrassing to the Democrats as Obamacare was at the time. Well, maybe not quite as much, but close. So similar situations, a 17-point upset from the Republicans 12 years ago translated to a 2-point upset now. I don't think it's the Democrats that got better. I just think Virginia has become that much bluer, that even in that circumstance, it's close. But this has happened before. And then at the beginning of 2010, just after Obamacare had passed, Scott Brown won a Senate seat in Massachusetts, a special election in Massachusetts. He was a Republican. Massachusetts is a very blue state. So it was a similar kind of situation. So I feel like, by the way, Chris Christie won in 2009 in New Jersey as well, Republican. So similar kind of situation to 2009. The two Republicans won, and, well, the Republican hasn't won this time in New Jersey, but close. And then the blue state went at the beginning of 2010. So to me, it's a no-brainer what's going on here. I don't think we should be talking incessantly about critical race theory. I think this is just simply a sign that the Democrats have some ground to make up if they don't want to get blown out of the water in a year's time. Just a couple of conventional wisdom elements that I think are worth addressing. And by the way, I actually talked about all of these in the podcast last night because they were so predictable. But then when I turned on CNN, out they came, just like I thought they would come. So let's go through them just very quickly. First of all, the Kamala Harris a few days back said what happens in Virginia in large part will determine what happens in 2022, 2024. A lot of people have not just taken the quote, but taken the concept on with it and said, therefore, this proves that Republicans are going to smash the midterms just like happened in 2010. And they might. I'm not saying they won't, but I think it's way too simplistic to say, as Virginia goes, there goes the midterms a year later.
Too soon. Yeah, it's too soon.
Completely different situation. I mean, for a start, the economy is extremely different now to what it was in 2009 and to 2010. I mean, right now, they're similar-ish, both coming out of a very deep recession. But if the economy is anything like it was in 2010 next year, yes, the Democrats will get blown out of the water, but you would expect it to improve somewhat compared to the Great Recession, the GFC. So that's a big difference. But also, who are we kidding? No one is going to remember this race in 2 weeks' time. The only reason I even remember Glenn Youngkin's name now is because it's written in front of me. He's the most forgettable person ever. This entire race is super forgettable. In a month's time, there'll be completely different issues, let alone in 12 months' time. There is no way this is a determinative of what's going to happen. But what it is a symptom of what might happen if the Democrats don't make some serious changes in some respect. So yes, I think they should take it seriously, but I feel like the fatalism on both sides that I saw on CNN today was ridiculous. It was way over the top. A lot can change. Another thing they talked about.
Is it instructive though that the Republican candidate didn't have Trump around that much at all and sort of tried to be a different kind of candidate to Trump, and the Democrat kept invoking Trump? Will those tactics be adopted, in the future? Possibly not by the Democrats, or depending on how close Trump looms to other races.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Fleck, because you're right that Terry McAuliffe, like every second word was Trump. Like you would have sworn he was running against Trump. How much he was talking about Trump. And that's not a surprise because Virginia is quite a blue state, and so you'd expect him to conclude that he would drive more turnout to the Democrats than to the Republicans by talking about Trump and tying Youngkin to Trump. I think actually a real takeaway from this election is that it didn't work, and I'll tell you what I mean. I don't just mean the result. I mean here I've got the here. This is exit polls. We're going to get better results than exit polls somewhere down the track. But this is today, all we've got is exit polls. Trump's favourability in the exit polls was 41% approval, 54% disapproval. Youngkin's was 53% approval, 44% disapproval. So what that tells me is no one bought the Youngkin is Trump 2.0 argument. They like Youngkin, they don't like Trump. So what that means is that, number one, I'm sure that the Democrats will keep on trying it because it's an easy way to try to win an election, to just go on and on about Trump rather than doing something yourself. But having said that, I think Youngkin proved if you get someone who really is not like Trump in any way, shape or form, like he was much more Romney-ish than Trump-ish. Yep. Like he's really sort of corporate and sort of, it's a bit of an equity kind of a guy.
Boring.
Yeah. I mean, look, let's face it. We are living in rather turbulent times at the moment. boring might be the way to win elections. That's certainly how Biden won the election. Like to say, I'm going to be boring. You can forget about politics when I'm around. So maybe, despite Biden's best efforts, things have continued to be turbulent even when he's around. So maybe the best thing to do is to be boring. Like whatever it is, no one confused Youngkin for Trump. It wasn't just the hair.
Will that embolden the Republicans to think that they can live without Trump and that actually there is life after Trump, beyond Trump?
I think that the vast majority of Republican politicians wish Trump no longer existed.
Right, I agree.
I think secretly, deep down, when they're nowhere near a microphone, if you could get them to speak in a way that wasn't recorded in a rubber room, then they would say, Trump does not help. Trump does not help at all. We win red states without Trump, and Trump helps us lose blue states. That's what I think they would think. The reason why they're tied to Trump is because they have to be tied to Trump, because the Republican support base love Trump. They love him. And they're not going to stop loving him. So regardless of whether they think it's in their electoral interests or not, they're stuck with Trump. And they're going to have to embrace him, because if they don't, they're going to lose primaries and they're not going to get turnout from their base who love Trump. I mean, look at Mitch McConnell. He clearly can't stand Trump, but he just keeps on gritting his jowls and not saying anything to piss Trump off or to alienate him, because he knows he has no choice. Where Mitch McConnell goes is where the establishment from the Republicans go. That's not going to change. So I think even though Youngkin proved that at least in a blue state, you can be a Republican who wins despite people trying to tie Trump to you if you run away from him enough. I think most Republicans who don't live in blue states are just going to have to campaign with Trump. Just have to take the good with the bad. No choice. Until this is one of those rides. You're in the middle of the roller coaster at the moment, Republicans. You cannot get off until they unlock the safety bar. And the safety bar is still fastened very tightly, I'm afraid, all the way to the end of the ride. So that's my take on that anyway. And the only other thing I'd say is that there's been a lot of talk about it's not legitimate because of the culture war, the unfair culture war. It's not fair. All these culture war issues they brought up, they have nothing to do with governorship and what's it got to do with schools? Why are we talking about schools for? It's not unfair. That's a garbage excuse from my point of view. And I'll tell you why. Obama, this actually started with Obama during his speech a couple of weeks back. He said, his campaign speech, he said, "We don't have time to be wasted on these phony, trumped up culture wars, this fake outrage. The right-wing media peddles to juice their ratings," he said. Now, I agree 100%. It's fake outrage. I spent half the last podcast talking about the fake outrage of some of this school issue. But what Republicans then say is they say, well, hang on. We're talking about a student who was raped. That's not fake outrage. That's a problem, isn't it? Don't you think? We shouldn't minimise what happened. And I agree. That's a real situation and a real victim there. But that happened 5 months ago. And no one talked about her until they thought they could win an election with her. I'm not saying her situation is fake. I'm saying the outrage from politicians is being exploited, or they're ginning up outrage for electoral purposes. That's the fake bit. It's inauthentic. They're not genuinely outraged. They're exploiting a situation. Now, that
sounds a bit like Afghan women on the geopolitical stage, but yes, exactly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're going to get to Afghanistan.
Bodies again, surprise, surprise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like all of a sudden, all these people who want to stay in Afghanistan, who want to fight the war in Afghanistan, become massive feminists when it looks like that there might be withdrawal. You're absolutely right. That's another exploitation situation. What I want to say about this culture war thing is that yes, the incidents that culture war topics are based on are very real and matter a lot. And by the way, I haven't said this explicitly, so let me just say it explicitly. There is propaganda in schools in America. You read about it all the time, about there is right-wing propaganda, but there's more left-wing propaganda. Most teachers are more lefty than righty in America. And yes, there is propaganda. I see plenty of examples of it. But that doesn't mean that the exploitation of that situation is not for electoral purposes purely, and not because they're actually outraged, right? It's a hijacking an issue for electoral purposes. Now, the thing is, everyone does this. This is how elections work. Culture wars are it's easier to run an election on a culture war than to run on policy, as the Democrats have discovered. But and that's the reason they do it. I mean, the left, Mcauliffe tried it as well. There was an incident which I'm not going to go into too much detail of, but there was an incident a couple of days ago during the weekend where the Lincoln Project sent out a bunch of dudes with tiki torches, dressed up, like it was four people, actually 3 guys and a girl, dressed up in this sort of corporate attire with tiki torches, chanting, we're all in with Glenn. And it looked pathetic. Like, it really looked pathetic. Like, no one would have thought these were the actual tiki torch racists coming out to swear their allegiance to Glenn outside his bus, 4 of them with their tiki torches in the middle of the day. No one would have thought that. It just reeked of student theatre. I mean, they were one step away from the wilderness koala. It really was not a convincing attempt to pose as racist. It looked like a student protest. Turned out it was the Lincoln Project. They said they were playing hardball. I would argue that the hard balls they were playing with were marbles. It was very tiddlywinks as a stunt. But regardless, when that happened, Mcauliffe and all his people started tweeting madly, going, why isn't Youngkin dissociating himself from these people? Does he think they're very fine people like Trump does? Yeah, etc. Like, they were really going hard on Twitter when it was so obviously not supporters of Youngkin. And that's an example of trying to gin up a culture war issue with fake outrage as well. Like, once again, Charlottesville, serious issue. Like, they were real Nazis at Charlottesville. I'm not minimizing what happened at Charlottesville. I'm saying they were, by turning it into a cheap stunt. Well, Terry McAuliffe didn't do the stunt, but Terry McAuliffe tried to exploit the stunt for fake outrage. So culture war works all round. It's always there. The question is, it was there in 2018 when the Republicans got absolutely shellaxed in the midterms, when Trump tried to do the immigration thing with a caravan. Oh, the immigrants are coming. Didn't work. Culture war is always there. It works when it works when the other side's brand is not good. It doesn't work when the other side's brand is good. If you're doing well, no one cares about the culture war. If you're doing shit, then people start paying attention to the culture war issues. So I think Democrats using it as an excuse is pathetic. It wouldn't have worked if they weren't on the nose. And so they need to work out why they're on the nose and do something about it. So that's really all I have to say about Virginia. Do you have anything else to say?
No, that's good. I was just curious about the Trump thing. Yeah,
fair enough. Okay. The other thing which I'm not going to say much about, in fact, I won't say anything about, is the Build Back Better bill. There's been a lot happening in the last couple of days. Joe Manchin has just chucked a tizzy. We'll be talking about that at length on Planet America on Friday. The drama goes on. We'll talk about the drama on Planet America. We'll talk about the policy on the podcast. That's how it usually works. That's how we usually split it up. But I won't talk about the policy until I actually know for a fact what's going to be happening, until there's a deal. But I want to leave all that aside. But I just want to say one thing about Congress, since we're undoubtedly going to be speaking for ages about Congress in the next podcast. There's been one thing about Congress I've missed since the holidays, which I really, really want to mention, because I think this is something that you guys are going to care about, which is I need to wrap up the debt ceiling. And all that debt ceiling stoush happened when we were away. So just to recap very rapidly, the debt ceiling issue was that America was about to hit the debt ceiling about a month ago. That means that they had debts due, but the Congress hadn't authorized the repayment of those debts. So as in they were about to default on their debt. That was the issue. There's 2 ways you can deal with this. You can either have what they call a regular order bill, which is just a normal bill where the Senate votes with a majority, 51 out of 100 vote to pass a bill. That's how bills used to get passed. If that's filibustered, then you need 60 votes to beat the filibuster. if you can't get that, then there is an alternative method of passing, which is reconciliation, which is a different way where you only need 50 votes, but you need to go through all these loopholes. Not loopholes, you need to jump through all these hoops. There's a lot of technicalities you have to satisfy to pass a bill by reconciliation. Now, you only get it's arguable whether you get only one reconciliation bill per year or not. They're assuming that you do. The one that they're using at the moment is the Build Back Better bill. So if they were going to lump in a debt ceiling increase into the reconciliation bill, it would have to be this one, which still hasn't passed. So they would have, if they'd used reconciliation, they would have defaulted on America's debt. All right, so that wasn't an option. So the only option left was a regular order bill. Now, Mitch McConnell said, no, we're not doing that. No Republicans were willing to support that, which meant, and not just they weren't willing to support it, they didn't have to support it. They just had to not filibuster it. If none of them had supported it and the Democrats had just voted 50 people plus Kamala Harris in the Senate, they would have been able to pass through regular order very easily. But the Republicans insisted, no, we're going to filibuster it. We're not going to let you even debate it. We're not going to let you have a vote on that. And I hated that. I understand why real partisans would do that. I don't understand why Mitt Romney or Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski, people who consider themselves to be mature legislators, would say, yes, we agree that this has to be done. We agree that for the good of the country, this has to be done. But we're going to refuse to even allow you to debate whether you should have a vote on this. No, I'm not letting you do that. I don't understand they can justify that. That to me is pure vandalism, pure legislative vandalism. And I think they should wear that for years. That's my view. But anyway, that's how it was. And Mitch McConnell, in the end, there was a bit of a standoff where they said, well, we can't pass it by reconciliation. We can't pass it by regular order. Therefore, we have one of two options. Either we default or Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema allow us to destroy the filibuster, which you can do with only 51 votes. You can vote to end the filibuster with only 51 votes.
For all time or for just that bill?
That's up to you. That's up to you. You can make a carve out for, say, debt ceiling votes. You could say it's for all time and then bring it back tomorrow. You can do whatever you like. With 51 votes, you can do whatever you like. But I'll tell you what, if they got rid of it, the other 50 Democrats wouldn't let them bring it back. So the other 48 Democrats wouldn't let them bring it back. So it would be, and Chuck Schumer wouldn't allow them to hold the vote. So it would have been permanent if they got rid of it. And it was looking like Joe Manchin was going to have to get rid of the filibuster. Otherwise, the country would default.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, to be honest, the filibuster, I hate the filibuster for all kinds of reasons. But having said that,
also because it can be just done by suggestion. Like if they actually had to stand up and piss at their table, fine. Like that would be fine. If the spectacle and the theatre of it actually followed through, I'd say fine. Okay, if you're prepared to read recipe books, do it. And I know that they have done in the past. But the fact that they can just suggest and just go nah, veto, it's just as you said, vandalism.
Yeah,
it's misuse of the machine of state.
Absolutely. Well, we had a situation there where Joe Manchin was seriously considering, I think, getting rid of the filibuster. And Mitch McConnell clearly knew that, because then he said, okay, tell you what, we'll give you an extension. We're going to give you I think it was a $480 billion debt extension. That'll last you 3 months till December. And then we'll do this again. You now have time to put it in your reconciliation bill. Okay? So pass it by reconciliation. We tell you right now, we'll tell you you're not going to get any Republican votes. So if you want to pass this, put it in the reconciliation bill, and you've got the 50 votes. You can do it. You can pass it then. And he gave them full warning. And then he said, okay, if we get to this point in 3 months again, you chose not to put in your reconciliation bill, it will be your fault that America goes into default. As if the Republicans can't, like a chiseled in stone or something, their votes. But anyway, I mean, that's obviously a ridiculous argument, but that's what he was saying. And he gave this argument for why he thought this was a reasonable point of view.
You agree with Democrats, they agree with you, the debt ceiling needs to be raised, and they're now saying they're willing to do it with Democratic votes alone. What possible difference does it make which mechanism they use to do it, whether it be by reconciliation or by Republicans just not filibustering them doing it with their 50 votes?
Look, they said they're perfectly prepared to do the job themselves. The easiest way to do that is through the reconciliation process, as I've pointed out for 2 months.
How is that easier than Republicans just not filibustering and then passing it with 50?
That would require getting consent from every single Republican to lower the threshold to 51.
Do you not have the power to do that?
I can't imagine that would happen.
Okay, now I played you a a longer grab than any human being should listen to with Mitch McConnell right then, because I wanted to be fair. I wanted you to hear what the arguments that are being used are. But it's a garbage argument, because the fact is that it's much harder to pass things by reconciliation, right, for a start. The easiest thing is just to pass it by regular order. And he's wrong when he says you would need to convince every single Republican to support this in order to pass it by regular order. No. You just need to convince 10 Republicans to not commit legislative vandalism and to oppose a filibuster. Those 10 Republicans don't even need to vote for the bill. They just need to not filibuster it, which until recently was standard operating procedure, but now everything needs to be filibustered, right? So that was a garbage argument. But so let's put aside what they're saying. I just want to talk about briefly what they aren't saying, because that's what's going to determine what's going to happen, okay? This is what they're not saying. Republicans, these are their incentives. Republicans want to force the Democrats to take this vote by themselves so they can hit them with it at the next election. That's kind of obvious. They want to hang it around their necks and go, oh, Democrats is spend and tax and spend, such spendthrifts, look what they're doing to the debt. They want to do that, okay. Everyone knows that. The thing that people might not realize is the reason why they're trying to get them to do it by reconciliation rather than through regular order. You go, well, what's the difference between letting them do 50 votes through reconciliation and letting them do 50 votes through regular order? Who cares? There's a big difference. The difference is this. I won't go into the technical reasons why, but if you pass something through reconciliation, you need to put a figure on it. When you pass through regular order, you can just say, we'll suspend the debt ceiling for 3 years or for 4 years, for a time period.
Okay,
and
not an amount.
Exactly, not an amount. And you can, and that's a little bit woollier. It's a little bit harder to pin people with that, because the debt ceiling isn't entirely clear at this point in time, and it's just suspended for a while, and then you'll bring it back. But with reconciliation, they need a number. They need to say, we are going to lift the debt ceiling to $25 trillion or $26 trillion or $30 trillion.
Where is it now?
It's, off the top of my head, I think it's 23. I think it's 23 and a bit, 23.6, I think, from memory. Don't quote me, but that's off the top of my head.
Ballpark.
Yeah, it's ballpark, yeah. So I think that and so Republicans really want to hang the number around their necks. That's why they're trying to divert them into reconciliation. The other thing is that from a incentive point of view for Republicans, they need to protect their rear from everyone else saying that they don't fight. It's a very important thing in Republican circles to, inverted commas, fight. That's what Trump likes to talk about all the time, how much he fights. Yeah. Now, when Mitch McConnell gave them that 3-month extension the other week, he got pilloried by Trump for folding, for not fighting, even though he was saving the country from defaulting. That was interpreted as being weak, not fighting. And it wasn't just from Republicans. It was from Democrats as well. That dick, Sheldon Whitehouse, who I've got no time for, he's a real partisan hack. He's a Democratic senator. He had a go at Mitch McConnell for folding. When Mitch McConnell just did him a favor, he was so keen to get partisan advantage and to rub Mitch McConnell's nose in it that he showed Mitch McConnell why Mitch McConnell should never do a deal again, because he would get punished for it by everyone. And so if the Republicans allowed the Democrats to pass it by regular order without filibuster, it would be interpreted as folding and not fighting So for their own self-defense, they need to push them into reconciliation as well. Okay, so that's the Republicans' incentives. Now, the Liberal Democrats have different incentives to the Conservative Democrats. The Liberal Democrats, their major aim, apart from stopping the country going into default, is to get rid of the filibuster. They're desperate to get rid of the filibuster so they can pass some of their other agenda items with 50 votes rather than 60 votes. And they know that reconciliation takes a while. So they're going to try to keep the debt ceiling increase out of a reconciliation bill as long as they can until they run out of time.
Right.
So the only way it can be passed is by a regular order bill. Why? So that way Joe Manchin is in exactly the same situation he was before, where the Republicans are not going to budge, and Joe Manchin knows if he doesn't get rid of the filibuster, that the country will default. That's the perfect situation for the Liberal Democrats. They want that situation, right? Yeah. So they're going to try and engineer that if they possibly can by putting it off, and then talking up how at the last second, when the country's got a day or two till default, they'll start talking up, going, "Oh my God, the sky's about to fall, the economy's about to go asunder, unless you, Joe Manchin, save us all by getting rid of the filibuster." So that's their incentive. Their incentive is to let go as long as possible. Yeah. Joe Manchin's incentive is the direct opposite. He knows the game they're playing. He's going to try and work it into whatever he can in the meantime. Mm-hmm. The thing is, there's 2 of Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, and there's 48 of the Liberal Democrats. So, well, the non-conservative Democrats. So he can't force them to do anything. They are going to put it off because they want to put it off. The Republicans, they're just not going to help at all. That's where the incentives are. So what I'm telling you is this will happen again. For those who are watching the video, the automatic lights have gone off at the ABC. That is how by the way, welcome to the palatial surrounds of the ABC. Isn't it marvelous? I hope you're enjoying it. But anyway, I just turned the lights back on. Yes, this will happen again because the incentives of everyone who can make something happen are to push it off. So get ready in December. There is going to be a standoff. It's going to be a massive clusterfuck. I don't know who's going to fold. I don't know if they're going to be pushed into default. We'll find out. But it's going to happen. So just get ready because of what I just said. That's enough about Congress. Shall we talk about something else? Do you have anything to say about any of that, Flick?
No, I'm just like, we don't know when this reconciliation Build Back Better bill is due, but it presumably before the end of the year, and so they could thwack it into that before the end of the year and before December.
I would be extremely surprised if Joe Manchin doesn't try to get it in the Build Back Better bill at some point in time. Yeah, I would be very surprised because it's the obvious answer for him, but I'm telling you now that the other Democrats won't.
They're going to hold back.
So we'll see. I mean, it might get to the point where there's a standoff where Joe Manchin says, "I'm not passing it unless you put that in," and then they might have no choice.
Why do the Conservative Democrats like the
filibuster? There's 2 reasons they I can see. I mean, I'm reading minds here, but there's 2 reasons that I can see. The first one is that they just simply disagree with a bunch of these bills that the Liberal Democrats want to pass. So they have no urgency to pass this stuff because they don't agree. It actually gives them an out. When there's the filibuster, you can go, "Oh, I'd love to pass it. I'd love to vote for it." But we can't. Filibustered. Oh, so it's a real easy excuse for moderates, especially hidden moderates. Like we all know, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are moderates. They aren't the only moderates. They're the only people who are prepared to go open with their moderation. There are other moderates who are sort of hiding amongst the Democratic caucus who get protected by the filibuster. And so, but what they also say is they say from a small C conservative perspective, if we get rid of the filibuster, then what will the Republicans do? The Republicans will do something as well, and then we'll go back and forth, constantly changing changing laws back and forth, even though that doesn't happen in any other country, which doesn't have the filibuster. It's like Americans are unaware that there's a rest of the world out there that can show them what happens when you don't have these peculiar American oddities in your parliaments.
But when I worked in the Australian Senate for Scott Ludlam, there was similar procedural curiosities that you wouldn't change, because if you know you didn't have power, then you wouldn't be able to benefit from them. So I get that.
Yeah, okay.
But it's still a stupid thing, and I wish they get rid of it.
Okay. Now we should get onto your pet topic, which is Julian Assange, which is the reason you're here. Now, like the last time we got you on, it was about a year back from memory when Julian was last in the dock. And we got some complaints. There were some people who didn't enjoy that we spent the best part of an hour chatting about Julian Assange. Well,
not that many actually. Like there was a few, but there was quite a lot of people who were interested and who were surprised actually by some of the stuff that we talked about. Because it's not often that you kind of get beyond the archetypal kind of top level. You know, Julian Assange is bad, Julian Assange is good. You know, like it's not often that people get a chance to hear some of the detail, although I promise I'm not going to go into exhaustive detail. But
there'll be some, I hope.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to just before you start with the detail, I just want to just deliver a personal message to those who are worried about us spending the next 45 minutes or whatever it is talking about Julian Assange, and that is tough. This issue does not get talked enough about in the media. Not in the Australian media, certainly not in the American media, and it should be. It's an important issue, like freedom of the press is an important issue, and if we're not going to talk about it on an American politics podcast, a wonky American politics podcast, hosted by an Australian as well, and I've got in front of me one of the very few people in the world who knows what the hell is going on in this topic. If we're not going to talk about it in depth, then who the hell is going to talk about it in depth? So we are going to spend the next however long it takes talking about this properly. We're going to do it properly because it's not done properly anywhere else. And today, that's our job. So if you don't like it, fair enough, hit the fast forward button. Go scoot forward about 40 minutes, 45. Let's see where we're at then. We'll talk about more stuff afterwards. But for now, Felicity, you watched the entire hearing. Is that right?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. It was well, it was kind of awful. You know, the last time we were in court was kind of exciting because he won, right? So he won in January. In January, the British district judge said, no, we're not going to send him to America. Like other people in a similar situation to Julian, Larry Love, who because of his autism and his mental health and his physical health, the British court said, no, we're not going to send this vulnerable person. In our US-UK Extradition Act, there is a clause, section 91, that says if it would be oppressive to send someone, we're not going to. So the British do hold this ability to not send people. Theresa May was responsible for not sending in this case, another hacker called Gary McKinnon. So the British do have a track record of saying no, and they said no in January. So that was a great day. It's only taken 10 years. You and I spoke last after the extradition hearing, after that judge had heard all these amazing witnesses. It was quite the case. It was remarkable. And before her judgment. And so we were in that waiting period. And we're in that waiting period again because we just had this 2-day of appeal. So the US decided to appeal Julian's win. And it's taken 10 months. And all that time, Julian's been in Belmarsh prison. A maximum security prison is not where journalists and publishers belong, surrounded by murderers and terrorists. And really during COVID, in very, very extremely terrible circumstances, being in his cell 23 and a half hours a day. So it's effective isolation in a sensory deprivation zone for why? It was a stupid reason for him to still be in there waiting for this appeal, given that the UK was the only jurisdiction where he wouldn't be able to be grabbed from. So he wouldn't flee England, given that it was England that had said, we're not going to extradite you. Also, he has 2 kids, right? He has 2 little boys, right? And he's broken and he needs some time. Anyway, so the US said, no, you can't leave.
Sorry, just to interrupt for a second. I should point out as well that whether, I mean, you make a good point about the fact that England is the only place where he's safe at the moment, so he's unlikely to leave that. But having said that, even if they say he's a flight risk, I could understand them saying that. I could understand that, but that doesn't explain why, as you say, he's in terrorist jail. Like you can be in light security prison. You don't have to be in max security prison if you're like. I don't think anyone's suggesting he's a violence threat. So
let's step back just a little bit. That he's not in jail. Like, because some of your listeners might be Russia gators or Hillary fans, and they think that he's in there because of the events of 2016. He's not. No. He's in there for publishing material about Guantanamo Bay, about the Iraq War, about Afghanistan.
It's a collateral murder.
And the collateral murder. Collateral murder is not mentioned by name, but it's part of the Iraq War. It's caught there.
Yeah.
So it's for those publications, like revealing war crimes, basically.
These are the ones that people were cheering him on about.
Absolutely. He won the Walkley, mate. He won the gold Walkley that year. He in some of those publications, the New York Times went first, or the Guardian went first. So, and also to remind listeners that WikiLeaks withheld 1/3 of the Afghan material to redact and in case it imperiled anybody, and the Iraq material had like tens of thousands of names taken out of them. So this wasn't a data dump, and it wasn't a lot of things that people are told. Anyway, so that's why the US are grabbing him. There's 18 charges, and it's about those 2010 publications. So should he be in jail at all? Maximum, minimum, farm, no, actually no. So while we can kind of get lost in the weeds sometimes when we think of something better, he shouldn't be in jail. Full stop.
Okay, before we go on to the legals, I should just point out the context of this is that the original denial of extradition was, as you say, it wasn't because of any of the issues that we've just been talking about for the last 5 minutes. It wasn't about freedom of the press. It wasn't about the New York Times published that his leaks first. If you're arresting him, why aren't you arresting the New York Times? It wasn't any of that stuff. It was just purely a case of, if Julian Assange is extradited, he's a suicide risk. He's broken, and this could potentially end him. And so it was a health call as much as anything.
That's right. The judgment was. The case wasn't. The case went into a lot of the material about the press freedom and about absolutely the goal for reform and change and peace and and justice. WikiLeaks has done a lot for a lot of court cases and a lot of justice projects. But you're right. Yeah. The judgment came down to. The judgment is a terrible judgment in all kinds of ways, because she not only repeated the US arguments about freedom of the press, she almost refined them. So that's a dangerous precedent for journalists everywhere, that judgment. However, on the last paragraph and line, she said, because of his mental health and because of what she had received in evidence, very considered evidence by senior and experienced psychiatrists, people who'd examined him, that she said he wouldn't survive.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the original judgment. So now the appeal that's just happened now is appealing that aspect of it, the health aspect. So before we go into the legals of what you just witnessed in terms of people trying to appeal a health call, I don't know how you do that, but we'll get to that. My first question is, the last time we saw Julian Assange, he was in his glass box like he was Magneto at the back of the court. Given that this is all about his health, did you see Julian Assange during this case? And did you get any sense of what his health was like?
We did see him. So 70 journalists had and observers like myself had access to a video stream, a live stream of the court in the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and there were several people also in the public gallery of that court. And they could see a screen. And it was of a bluish room in Belmarsh where he could appear. And I was expecting him to be there throughout. And he was, at a previous hearing, he was sitting in a room in Belmarsh. And it was shocking to see him then, and it was shocking to see him very briefly during this period. In this 2-day hearing last week, he requested to go and be there in the court, and they denied that request and said, no, you can watch it on the video. As it turned out, he wasn't feeling well enough to attend. Okay. And we were told that he wouldn't be appearing. And then at a certain point, there he was. There he was, with his head in his hands some of the time, blinking furiously. He blinks quite heavily anyway, as you may recall. And with longish hair and wearing a white shirt and a tie and looking pretty bad, Chaz, looking pretty bad, looking pretty disheveled and thin. And you know, when he was holding his head in his hand, it was kind of heartbreaking because he was right there in my screen, like right there, really big. And then he moved to being out of shot, but you could see his reflection in a glass door. And then he had a conversation with someone, and it subsequently we learned that he was taken to that room because the Belmarsh authorities thought that he was required to attend. And he was, you know, heavily drugged, it looked like. So not well, and not well enough to attend his own hearing. And also, Chaz, while he was in that room listening, the prosecution, the US, James Lewis, appearing for the US, was talking about how he's just making it up. And he's not depressed at all, and he's not severely depressed. He might be moderately depressed. He doesn't really want to kill himself. You know, it was kind of really distasteful, what he was hearing about his mental health, about the threats that his children are under from the CIA. Like, it was just, it was both heartbreaking that he couldn't be there to participate in his own fate. This is his fate, right? This determines whether he lives his days out in a US prison or not. But he couldn't participate in it, both because they prevented him from doing that, but also because he's so unwell, because he's so unwell.
Okay, let's carry this thread on a little bit more of what you're saying about what the Americans were saying about him being a faker, etc. Because that's my next question. My next question is, how does one appeal a health call? It's one thing to appeal a finding in law or a factual finding. It's another thing to say, well, you know how you said he was mentally unwell? Well, we disagree. How they make their case, the Americans?
Look, their case is weak, and it showed, right? It showed because of how nasty and bitchy they were and the kind of crazy stuff that they brought up. So the appeal's on 5 grounds, and the first one is to say that the judge didn't apply a test called the Turner test, which is all about what is required to show that someone is really suicidal. And the US is saying, well, the judge said that he was suicidal then, but what about now? He might be different now because, you know, like, we've given him this incentive that, you know, he could serve his sentence in Australia, and we can give assurances that he won't be put into this particular thing called SAMs, Special Administrative Measures, effective, like, torturous isolation.
Solitary, essentially, like hardcore solitary. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, such solitary that it's crazy. A prison warden came and gave evidence about what SAMs are like, and it was scary. I had nightmares about it. So he's been given all these reasons to not be depressed. So you know, that judgment was wrong because he might be much better now, and he's not that bad. So there was this kind of strange minimization, to the point, Chaz, where they were saying things like, well, he once asked for oranges and milk, and people who ask for oranges and milk can't be depressed. I mean, that's where they're at, right? Pretty sad. Okay. So like, crazy stuff like that. Then there was then the other way that you undermine a health ruling like this is to say that the psychiatrist, the evidence of the psychiatrist is wrong, and they're not actually saying that. They're trying to get the psychiatrist's kind of character smashed, and to say he misled the court, because in one of his reports he didn't acknowledge that Stella was the mother of Julian's children.
Well, he kept it hidden.
He kept it hidden at a time when it was being revealed that this CIA paid surveillance company called UC Global, Undercover Global, was threatening the children and getting nappies and DNA, and Stella was moving houses and trying to become safer because of this incredible targeting that's since been written about by Yahoo, and in fact that article was submitted as evidence to the court, so that will be part of it. We can talk about that later. So at this particular time, when all this was going on, the psychiatrist said, I have to present this report. I have to do another report later, so I can clarify it then, but I have a duty of care under the Hippocratic Oath to not harm. And this is if you're not a health professional, and if you haven't thought about the Hippocratic Oath and your duty to not harm, he was weighing up these two things, and he had a duty to the court and a duty to not do harm and to not imperil the security of children. And also, how relevant was it anyway? He talked about how like Julian Assange had a partner and children that were young. So the details were there, but not that there was Stella. So that is the nitpicky kind of desperation of the US case in this appeal, that they've gone after this renowned, well-known psychiatrist called Kopelman, and they're trying to assassinate him, even though the judge in her ruling detailed and explained that situation and described why she understood his human response to that situation, but said it doesn't actually materially change the evidence. It doesn't change the quality, the access he had, the detail he went into. She was satisfied that it was enough, that it was of a better quality. So anyway, so they went after that, like, unbelievably. Another ground that they had was that the judge should have told them how she was going to rule, because then they could have given assurances. And why didn't she tell them what her ruling was going to be, so that they could change their tune? Because actually the issue around SAMs, special administrative measures, and this particular facility where he would be sent, ADX Florence, they were talked about exhaustively in the extradition hearing. And throughout, the US just said, they're fine, that's fine, and described why they were fine. There's long documents where they said SAMs aren't that bad. And because people can speak to the people who give them the food through a slot in the door, that's not isolation. And because they can speak to their lawyers, that's not isolation. So instead of saying we may not give him SAMs, they said, no, we'll probably give him SAMs. That's quite likely. And anyway, so
hang on, sorry, I just need to pick you up on that, because you mentioned before about them saying they weren't going to do SAMs. So you're saying that what their argument was saying, we're not going to put him in solitary, but even if we did, it's not that bad. Is that their argument?
That's what they were saying during the trial.
Right. Okay.
During the actual hearing, when the evidence was coming out, and like the defense really pushed this. Of course they did, because that would trigger his suicide. He wouldn't cope with that. So they banged on about it a lot. But then all of a sudden, the prosecution is saying, oh, this is such a surprise. We had no idea you were going to take this into account. You should have given us opportunity to give assurances. Okay. And so then the fifth element of their appeal is, we are going to give you assurances. And here are these assurances that we won't give you SAMs, but we reserve the right to give you SAMs if you're naughty. And we won't send you to ADX Florence, but we reserve the right to do so if you're like, so they're actually not assurances. Gotcha. In the actual, in terms of the words that they use, it's a complete carve out. And additionally, this other assurance about being able to serve out time in Australia is amazing, because that's only available after all of the court processes have ensued, okay, and all of the appeals. And that's up to 10 years.
Yeah.
Up to 10 years. It could be, but it's still years, right? Years. Years.
Yeah.
The other thing here is that who determines the SAMs? Who determines the facility? Well, it's the CIA. Actually.
Okay. All right.
And
I know where we're going now.
Right? This is the agency that whose antics and behavior like made a psychiatrist so nervous about what actual material effect. This is not a nice agency. This is not an agency that does nice things.
Now we've brought the CIA. Let's hit pause on this part of the conversation, and let's now move to Yahoo, because the article that you referred to before, because that then fits. I'm assuming that this played a role in the hearing, given what you just said. So just to recap for people, we did mention this in the previous podcast, but essentially there was a Yahoo article, a very, very long Yahoo article, which I will put in the homework above. I've already put in the homework before. If you hit the blurb, you'll be able to read it there. It's well worth reading if you have any interest in this topic. Essentially, Mike Pompeo, the CIA chief at that point in time, for whatever reason, appeared to become obsessed with getting WikiLeaks and getting Julian Assange. And while it's a bit vague exactly what was decided, what wasn't decided, there's some suggestion that there may have been some serious discussion about potentially killing him. What there seems to be almost no doubt about is that they were definitely trying to kidnap him at the very least, to the point this was taken so seriously. When I say they, I mean upper reaches, upper management of the CIA and Mike Pompeo, and this was taken so seriously by other parts of the Trump administration, and they weren't thrilled about it either, from the sounds of things. But they were panicking that Julian Assange was about to be kidnapped, because they were taking it very seriously, and was about to be sent for rendition, which is what they did to torture people in these lawless countries during the War on Terror early on after 9/11. They were so worried that was going to happen without there being any charges against Julian Assange that they rushed through charges just so if he was kidnapped, it wouldn't be a war crime. It would be legal. And that's the reason why, if you recall, when Julian Assange's charges were first laid back in, was it 2018, I think, or 2017 maybe, they were a bit half-assed, and they had to have a second set of charges to clean up from the first set, because they just rushed them through as fast as they possibly can, at least according to this article, just to make sure, because they thought he would be kidnapped any day. So they had to have some legal justification for him being kidnapped at that point in time. That's how worried they were, the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, about Mike Pompeo's plans. And now it wasn't just about Julian Assange. They were also engaging in serious surveillance of WikiLeaks as well. It went into some depth. Do you want to add anything else to this sort of summary of what the Yahoo article said?
Yeah, look, it's a long piece, and it's really worth reading. It's amazing, and it's based on interviews with 30 CIA and former government officials, 8 of whom confirm the plans and the plots to kill and kidnap Julian. Another thing is that there was collaboration, discussion, and agreement from the UK intelligence agencies to also take a role here, as they are authorised to do things like shoot 'em ups on the street of the streets of London. The fear of the Americans and the CIA was, in fact, that Julian was about to be whisked away by Russians to Moscow. This is not the case. It was never the case, but they were very nervous about that. And that is why they were planning all these shoot 'em outs on the street.
To be fair to the CIA, and you're not going to hear that from me very often, according to the article, there were plans to whisk him away, but not from Julian Assange. That Ecuador at one point in time, the Ecuadorian embassy at one point in time was talking about it, and they offered it to Julian Assange.
But not whisking him away. They were offering him the opportunity to be designated as a diplomat.
Yeah.
And under that designation to have protection. And he immediately said no. Yeah. No. That's not, like, he's a very principled person. It's, Trump, remember, Trump sent Dana, what's his name? Rochberger. How do you say his name?
Rohrbacher. Yeah.
Right, Rohrbacher. Sent Rohrbacher to the embassy to say, tell who gave the DNC leaks and I'll let you go, mate. And he said, no, I'm a journalist. I do not release my sources. And let me explain to you what the First Amendment is. So like he had an out. And that was one of the most amazing testimonies given in the hearing by Jennifer Robinson, who was witness to that. He was offered a deal, but he said, no, I can't do that. So similarly here, he said, no, I would never go to Russia. That would be completely wrong for me and for Ecuador and for the whole situation.
Before we take back to the case, let me just ask you just very quickly, because the thing I find strange about this is Pompeo's single-minded sort of almost Moby Dick style obsession with Julian Assange. Because this is weird to me because Mike Pompeo is generally considered to be a smart person and an ambitious person, and yet here he was behaving like a bad guy in an 80s movie. Like if you gave him a South African accent, he would have been in Lethal Weapon 2. Like what the hell was motivating him? Why was he so obsessed with it?
That he's intelligent. But anyway, I mean, I really feel sorry for people like Maurice Payne, who had to actually sit opposite him, and I don't often feel sorry for her. Now listen, the reason why Mike Pompeo was so angry is explained in that article, and it was because of the Vault 7 release. Vault 7 was a release without the weapons being released. That was highly redacted release by WikiLeaks of the hacking tools of the CIA. So Vault 7 was so powerful because it was WikiLeaks speaking directly to companies like Microsoft and Linux and Cisco to say, this is how the CIA have messed with your stuff, fix it. So but the Vault 7 released enough of the material to prove that was the case. And then all of these companies were able to patch their systems. So the Vault 7 revealed the cyber weapons of the CIA to compromise cars, smart TVs, web browsers, most smartphones. And so that release of Vault 7 totally sent them crazy. They were already pretty crazy against him, but that sent them into an apoplexy. And it motivated Mike Pompeo in his first speech as the director of the CIA to designate WikiLeaks as a hostile non-state intelligence agency, which justifies a different scale and type of targeting of surveillance and attack by the CIA, because it's a spook, it's a spy, and which you can't do to a publishing house. If you think about it, I just want to say one thing about that designation: hostile non-state intelligence agency. WikiLeaks is different to intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies gather information and keep it secret. WikiLeaks is given information. Remember, everything on the WikiLeaks website has been trusted to it by a whistleblower. They don't hack, right? So they receive information that they make public, right? Very different to an intelligence agency. It is not an intelligence agency. But this designation helped the CIA justify that scale of operation. And in the article, they explained that Trump was never told this was happening. So that's why he swaggered around and waddled around on that stage talking about a hostile non-state intelligence actor. And that's how the CIA got that kind of really aggressive targeting and surveillance, not just of Julian, but of like anyone who went into the embassy practically. And 21 Australians wrote a letter to our government saying, were we on speculative kill lists? Were we followed around? Were our devices like copied? Because you'd go into the embassy, you'd hand your phone and your computers over, and they just ripped copies, right? Of Felicity, journalists, of lawyers.
Felicity, do you think there's any chance that you have been surveilled? You've hung around with these people.
Yes, yes, they talk about me in the UC Global files. Yeah.
Wow. Do you think maybe they might be watching this podcast? I'd love the ratings.
Listen, exactly. Well, look, everyone's talking about this. Like, so earlier on you said, that like no one is reporting this. In fact, every time there's something about Julian or WikiLeaks, like every masthead covers it. It's not always the best coverage,
Sure.
Some of it's pretty malicious, but and there is a growing awareness shows you, like, you know, Alan Jones and Bolt this week have been talking about the case. You know, the spectrum of parliamentarians that are concerned about this range from the Greens to Barnaby Joyce to George Christensen to Labor to Albanese. You know, like, there's a really broad range of human rights organizations, press freedom organizations. It's no longer a hard one to work out that this is sending an incredibly chilling effect to designate journalism and publishing as espionage. Like, so it's pretty serious chilling effect kind of stuff.
Exposed so there.
Even the Pope's talking about it. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just, it's like, this is a cascading effect now. And, you know, that's despite quite a lot of character assassination and psyops against this guy and this outfit. A lot of like so much misinformation has been circulating about this person, which is one of the reasons why I've stuck with it, because what I see and know and what is being reported is so different, mate. It's so different.
What you've exposed there is that I actually don't watch much TV. I just bluff when I do. Well, I actually spend my life watching chiropractor videos on YouTube. That's basically all I do, watching people get their neck and back cracked. That's how I spend my days. Let's leave that aside. The reason we brought this up, the CIA thing, was because you just said that it's going to be the CIA who decides where Julian Assange, if he's extradited, where he goes and what's done to him. And so I thought it's probably relevant, this Yahoo story about what the CIA have been up to for the last few years. So can I presume that came up in the court case?
It certainly did come up in the court case, and it was placed into the record, and the judges will be examining that testimony. But also, so too, will they be examining the fact that, and a follow-up article was also provided, that Pompeo didn't deny, he had opportunities to deny this. In fact, he said no, that the people who'd spoken to Isikoff should be prosecuted. Okay, which confirms it's bloody true, right? So yes, this is relevant. Why? Because a country that is saying, we're going to treat this man fairly and we're going to house him securely and look after his mental health, and he'll be able to do all kinds of activities, and he'll be able to talk to the person who's giving his dinner through the slot in a door, and it's going to be fine. This is the same country that has been plotting to kill him and to kidnap him, and like has exhibited excessive and extreme hostility towards this person.
Okay,
so that's why it's relevant.
Yeah. So when that argument is then made, what's the Americans' response?
The Americans' response. So the appeals are boring. You know, like the appeals aren't like the witnesses and the passion and the speeches. It's about lawyers taking judges through bundles and tabs and paragraphs to make a very specific legal argument and thread of argument. So it's pretty boring.
It's not Alan McNeil.
Gotcha. It's not Atticus. Where's Atticus? Where's Gregory Peck when you need it? So the first day, the prosecution spoke all day, and then the defense had half an hour. And then the second day, the defense spoke all day, and the prosecution had half an hour at the end. So there was sort of this kind of concept of rebuttal and balance and use of time. And they used every second, right up to the clock, like in a parliamentarian speech, you know, they were using it. And so the first day, one of the things that James Lewis said for the US was, no one's ever committed suicide that has been extradited from the UK. So that's one of their comebacks. And the defense say, yes, and that's because UK courts don't send people who are vulnerable. That's why that's in the extradition treaty, doofus. You know, so that was the kind of, kind of balancing act there. So the fact that the US are saying, we'd like to give these assurances and we should have been able to give assurances, the defense said, you could have given assurances throughout. This was a constant preoccupation in the hearing. And you chose to actually valorize SAMS and this horrendous facility, ADX Florence. When you think of Florence, this is the opposite of Florence.
Sure.
So there was this kind of, you could see the balance in the time and in the arguments. And for me...
Did they directly respond to the CIA point? Or did they just leave that?
I think they just left it.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they basically got on this kind of strange, haughty, kind of faux effrontery of like, how could you possibly, question our commitment and our word? We've never been accused of not living up to our assurances. Well, the defense skeleton arguments, which I'll send you the link for the homework, is full of times when they have not lived up to their assurances. And also Amnesty International say, like, these assurances aren't worth the paper they're written on. And they've had insight into, various cases where the US have just done exactly the opposite. And why do the US get to say that is because they always put a clause in these assurances that they get to reverse them if they feel like it. Sure. And they will feel like it. And that will still be part of the assurance. So, yeah.
Okay, so...
Pretty weak.
So where we go from here in terms of, first of all, how long we expected to wait for a verdict? And secondly, can you tell me what happens in either scenario?
Yes, I can.
If he wins or loses.
Right. So the judges at the end of the 2 days said, you've given us a lot to think about, and we're going to go off and do that now. And we're expecting at least 6 weeks. Okay. It'll take at least 6 weeks for them to come to a conclusion. It's kind of they're juggling all kinds of things, the diplomacy of it, So about towards the end of the year, they will bring down a ruling. Now, if Julian wins, he may walk free if the United States don't say we're going to appeal to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
If the United States realize that 2 courts in the UK have said no, and they're likely to be kind of smashed again, the higher the courts, the more authority. So if the High Court gets behind the district judge, and the district judge was hard, she was an awful judge, and she didn't like him, and she was like, she did this thing called descending, like Lord Denning went on about, judges should be quiet and they shouldn't descend off their dais and into the muck of it all. She often did. She was not a nice judge, but she couldn't help but say, we can't send him. And she was thorough and she was mean about it. So if they get behind her, it's very unlikely that the Supreme Court will undermine both of those lower courts. So the US might read the writing on the wall and say, fine. Then he'll be free. Okay, then he'll be free. If Julian wins, if they don't appeal, but they might appeal. Right?
If they appeal, how long do you think that would be till the Supreme
another
Court
2 years?
Goes? Right.
Another year, another 2.
I mean, so they could do that just to be pricks. Like if they...
And that's what they're doing. This is lawfare. This is punishment by process.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a case, and they never have had a case, and so that's one trajectory, and it could also be that Julian loses. In which case, if he does lose, then of course he will appeal to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So it could be done and dusted by December, and he could come home. They all there was a theoretical point put by James Lewis towards the end, which I missed actually, because it was 2:00 in the morning and I was freaking out. And he said, well, we could just start the whole process again and put assurances in from the start. And I just went, oh God, really? It's possible. If they don't drop the charges, if Julian is sent home, he could be extradited from here, right? So they need to drop the charges. And if they don't drop the charges, he won't come home. Why would he?
Yeah.
He would stay there where he has children and a home. So that's the time frame that we're thinking will be what happens.
Let me ask you an unusual question, which is that now I understand from Julian's perspective, he just doesn't want to be in jail, and especially doesn't want to be extradited to America, to American jail. And for supporters of Julian Assange, and for supporters of Julian Assange, that's what's happening to him personally is of great import, of course. But there are a bunch of people out there who don't necessarily have an opinion one way or another about Julian Assange himself, but have quite a high opinion of the freedom of the press, and are concerned about the precedent value of what's happening to Julian Assange. So my question to you is this: if Julian Assange walks free because of his mental health and not because of any precedent value to do with the press issues.
Yep.
Do you regard this as a victory?
Yeah, look, this is similar to a question that you asked Kristen, which was it would be a part victory because you can't help but understand the press freedom issues as being embodied in him and in the fact that they've chased him across the world. So it's highlighted those dangers. But look, as Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders said the other day to Philip Adams, this is a very dangerous time for journalists. And this ruling by the district judge, while it was positive for him, it was positive for him because it said he shouldn't be extradited, but she didn't rule that Julian should go free because he's right. No, she ruled because he should go free because he's weak, right? And it's a dangerous ruling, and there should be a cross appeal on those points so that precedent doesn't exist. Because if that precedent exists, and this is what Julian spent most of the time when I visited him in Belmarsh talking about, which was any journalist working in Britain can just be grabbed. It's the extraterritoriality of this, the extrajudicial kind of like the fact that the extraterritoriality, the fact that the US is saying that if you're not from our country, you don't have any loyalty to our country, and you're not in our country, we can still grab you. And if China starts doing that and Russia starts doing that to foreign nationals, for writing stories and for publishing things, we're really in very big trouble. So I think that Julian will want to continue to challenge that ruling, even if it does free him. But his health is so bad right now that what you say, people don't need to care about Julian Assange. This is a human being.
Yeah.
That the United Nations expert on torture said he's never seen democracies gang up on a single individual like this, and he is screaming from the rafters about this as torture. This is the UN expert. This guy is a Germanic Swiss. These people don't muck around. I lived in Switzerland for some time, and I know this. This, Nils Meltzer has got a book coming out in February, just saying that he came to this case hostile, like, I don't want to read about this guy, what's this? And then the more he saw, the more you go, oh my God, you get to the, you're fucking kidding me, 8,012, pretty soon, because it's full of these amazing anomalies. So I think if you don't care about Julian Assange or you don't like him, think about why you've been encouraged to not care about him quite as much as you have. How much character assassination has gone into this one person who is actually a softly spoken intellectual, who's quite playful, very Australian, and very likable by all kinds of people. It's not just me and lefties, it's righties, it's actors, singers, I don't know, Patti Smith, and Zizek and Noam Chomsky, and these are pretty good judges of character, I reckon. So this isn't a terrible person, some demon, but he's been demonized, to normalize this treatment. And what we're witnessing is a slow murder of someone.
I'm going to ask you a general
Australian.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm going to ask you a general WikiLeaks question in a sec, but before I do you have anything else to add about the hearing?
One thing, which is about open justice. Open justice is a really important concept. And when Black Lives Matter challenged in New South Wales the right to protest, the Supreme Court of New South Wales just, YouTube streamed during times of COVID the proceedings so that people could participate. And I was one of 2,300 people who happened to be watching that particular thing. The UK courts throughout this whole process have been so closed and so difficult that the Reporters Without Borders have said in no country at any time have they had more trouble following a court case. It has been incredible. And the tech that they were using for some of them were just the most hideous 1980s, like telephone dialing in things. Considering this is a Five Eyes country that can take a photo of a white golf ball in a white room on a white bench from space, and they couldn't actually get the tech right, was kind of telling. And so open justice, when there is no open justice, when you can't participate in court cases and witness them, then there's something really wrong. And that's the same thing is happening here with the Cleary case. So that's part of that trend as well. So I just it was really difficult to follow, and at least I got to be inside the courtroom this time, whereas before I had to follow the entire extradition hearing 1 month from 8 at night till 2 in the morning, following Twitter, following people who were inside that courtroom's Twitter. So I tried to perform that service last time. And so on my Twitter, Flick Rubicon, that you'll find 2 threads that, madly trying to type what's happening, and every now and then having a burst of my personality come through, and then realizing I shouldn't do that and going back to being factual. So you can find that. And also Mary Kostakidis live tweeted, Kevin Gostolza, James Dolman, a few people like that, tried to cover this. So by reading a few of those tweets, you can see what happened in real time a little bit.
I'll get you to give me their handles after this
Sure.
podcast, and I'll put them in the homework so people can go and have a look at themselves at their leisure. My final question on WikiLeaks is something I've read from a few people is suggesting that this whole issue of WikiLeaks from America's perspective is kind of fighting the last war in a way, in that WikiLeaks is no longer the prime medium for leaking documents. There are a million different ways of leaking documents now. In fact, we're about to talk about Facebook, where there was a leak just now in the last few months of Facebook papers from a completely different method. Do you share that view that the genie's now out of the bottle and no one's going to stop leaks? They're just going to happen?
Oh, well, I think the Prime Minister's office did a leak this week, didn't they, of text messages between him and Macron? Yeah, leaking is perennial. Leaking's been going on for a long time. But the particular combination of the internet with publishing is something that WikiLeaks pioneered, but it's definitely a model that has taken off. I was in a talk just 2 days ago that talked about there being 90 copycat website kind of services like WikiLeaks. So WikiLeaks pioneered in this combination of journalism and the internet. There's a chapter in a book that I edited. It's called A Secret Australia, and Sulette Dreyfus talks about the ways in which WikiLeaks pioneered in all kinds of ways. The anonymous Dropbox, which now the ABC has, and the Guardian and the New York Times, everyone has that. WikiLeaks invented it. Huge consortiums of journalistic publications having an eye on documents and collaborating. WikiLeaks pioneered that. So, the kind of groundbreaking stuff that WikiLeaks has done has been taken up by others. And you're right, WikiLeaks continues to be trusted with material, but others are too. Yes. So it's not the last war as such as trying to punish the most effective example that inspired so many others. I think, but it is an old thing. The appeal was lodged by the Trump administration. At any time, Joe Biden's administration, which of course he was part of the Obama administration that decided against prosecuting this publisher because of the New York Times problem. Well, Trump didn't care about that New York Times problem, but Biden is trying to run this line about freedom of the press and protection of journalists, and keeps coming up against this problem. It's a problem for the Brits. It's a problem for Australia. It's a problem for America. He could just end it. He could just end it. And I think it will be a bit like, I used to work at the UN and on conflict prevention and following the Security Council. And sometimes wars just end from fatigue. There's not actually a geopolitical or a domestic reason necessarily that comes out. People are just, it's tired. People are tired and broken. In this situation, I think there's a lot of pretty bored and broken people who would like this to go away. This is a headache they'd like to go away. And it could go away like that if Biden's Department of Justice just says, you know what, we're just not going to appeal this and we're going to let this go. We
will see. Yes. Like I foreshadowed a second ago, seeing as we're getting you in to talk about leaks and you're pretty good with social media, I figured I wanted to know your opinion about all the leaks going on with Facebook in the last few months, because there's been quite a few. And it's, like you said, we described the WikiLeaks consortium. They had one of those consortiums for the Facebook papers as well. So, do you have any take on any of that? Were there any of those? Did any of those articles interest you? Do you think that? Do you think it was all hype, or do you think there was stuff of interest in there?
Definitely stuff of interest, because her name's Frances Hagen. Horgan. She came out on 60 Minutes. We got the Facebook files before she came out, but she left Facebook in May, and she came out on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, and to describe why she collected the documents that she did, and what her motivations were for exposing Facebook. And what she exposes what is kind of internal dissent, the fact that there are people in Facebook who care, that they knowingly continue damage that they do, damage to young girls using Instagram. They know that it's damaging, and they continue. They know that their platform is being used to launch genocides, like in Myanmar. They know that it's polarizing, that polarization works better, gets more engagement. And so it's this fact that there is this kind of knowing damage being done. That's important. She's kind of kind to Facebook. She wants to redeem Facebook. She wants to save Facebook from itself. She thinks it can be reformed. What's also kind of telling is, I thought that, in front of the Senate Commerce Committee, Blumenthal thanked her so much for her brave stand. We will do anything and everything to protect you and stop any retaliation against you. There's someone I'd like you to meet called Chelsea Manning. So it was an interesting, like, certain whistleblowers who look a certain way and who talk a certain way, because what she's done is she's taken these documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and she's put this forward because Facebook's a publicly traded company, and so it's obliged not to lie to its investors, and so it's making material misstatements and omissions of facts that affect its investors. So I find some of that. Like there's some interesting articles, one called Planet Facebook, which I thought they're just ripping off Chaz, but it's talking about how this is how does this company that's on the west coast of America affecting things in India and Ethiopia and Vietnam and Britain. Facebook is being used, CNN found last month it's being used in human trafficking. So it shows the scale of the problem, the scale of this company, that they can't moderate content. They don't have all of the languages. They're not
just to interrupt quickly, that was the thing which I found really interesting, which I hadn't really thought about before, which is that I think it was, off the top of my head, I haven't got this written down, I think it was 90% of the languages that Facebook appears around the world in, they don't have speakers of working for them. So when we think about all the problems that we see in English, that's where they have all their resources, like to patrol the politics and the disputes in America and in Australia and England. But in 90% of the languages that they appear in, they've got no one resolving any kind of dispute. So God knows what's going on there. Anyway, so you go
even when, like, for example, they know that there was this huge tide of anti-Muslim violence under Modi. But they haven't dealt with just in that country when there's so many users there. So there was shocks, there was kind of zingers and scandals about the fact that while all this is going on, Facebook is worrying about TikTok as a threat, that teens spend more time on TikTok and all this kind of stuff. So there's like general, like, Facebook is hideous stuff. But something like, you won't be surprised that I agree with Snowden, who said, Facebook is Facebook. Don't write about the name change. Write about what they do, because that's what matters. paperwork doesn't change the nature of a thing.
Yeah.
And
Living in a
another
mention change.
okay, we have to talk about meta.
Okay.
Also, Evan Greer, who like, if you follow anyone in America on internet politics, Fight for the Future, and Evan Greer, I highly recommend. He said, Facebook has literally waged war on people showing their tits on the platform, but now their new logo basically looks like boobs. So like, while all this scandal is going on, Zuck is definitely having a go at trying to distract us from us noticing things about what this company is doing from the files, but also making us think about, what its business model is, which is a surveillance. They surveil, like that's what they're doing. They're surveilling and they're trading and using information, but they're also using labor. And there's an amazing academic, Jack Cho, who does a lot of research about Foxconn and Apple and what's going on there. But he came and he did a fantastic book a little while ago called Goodbye iSlave, a Manifesto for Digital Abolition. And he looks at 21st century slavery. So he's looking at what Apple is doing and Foxconn factories in China and how terrible it is. But he's also looking about how we're addicted to devices. And he thinks about that in terms of labor provided by people who are addicted to these platforms. There's a plane going by, sorry. And he says, consider these numbers. There's just a few numbers here. I know you'll be able to stay with me, Chaz, because you do this to us all the time. In 1800, the British Empire had 1 million slaves. 1 million slaves, or 2.5 billion hours of labor.
Okay.
In 2014, Foxconn had 1.4 million workers, so about 4.8 billion hours. And he considers that's a form of slavery. In the same year, Facebook had 1.4 billion users, or 652 billion hours of labor. That is, Facebook has 261 British empires or 137 Foxconns of labor at its disposal, right? So think about Facebook as, a surveillance-driven business model fundamentally in conflict with human rights and democracy. So it's not just about reducing harms it does, actually, with Facebook. It's about having alternatives. And the big one that's needed, and what's being called for in America in the light of these horrendous revelations, is that the US has no data privacy law. And a data privacy law would stop that business model being able to just suck all our data, and Facebook would change, like, fundamentally. What's a problem when we think about Facebook and these big tech companies is, we can't possibly change them. We absolutely can change them. They are platforms, they are businesses, and they are not immortal, and they are not they're not untouchable. They can be changed. This is a monopolistic enterprise that can be stopped with antitrust kind of means. So we could talk about Facebook for a long time. I want everyone to get off Facebook. When somebody first told me to get off Facebook years ago, I resisted that, and then I started to think about it more and more and do a bit more research, and I've been off Facebook since 2014 and I haven't regretted it. There's a fantastic piece on Arena Online by Timothy Eric Strom, which I highly recommend, and I'll get you to put that in the because it really describes this metaverse thing that Zuckerberg is trying to distract us with. So while all this, people are actually having a proper good look at what Facebook is and does maliciously, deliberately, despite knowing itself how damaging it's being, Mark's going, look over here, there's the meta. We're going to change everything and it's going to be great. And Web 3.0, Web 3.0, nah. It's being rubbished all over. So
I was going to say, I'll wait to see what the metaverse offers. But I must say, when I saw the demonstration of Mark Zuckerberg walking around with his clothes,
like a Thunderbird,
it was very Second Life. I remember hearing all that Second Life a few years back and going, I'll give this a go. And I got in there and I spent about 10 minutes walking around and was going, I got better things to do. And that was the end of my Second Life experience.
Okay, so Second Life's one thing, but VR is something else. How much VR have you done? Because it is utterly transformative and amazing, and it is the emergent technology. And if it gets turned into Facebook, it's like the internet has become a McDonald's when it should be a Library of Alexandria, and that's partly because of Facebook. And so if Mark Zuckerberg is going to hijack VR, then he's got some big warriors on his hands, because VR is so remarkably wonderful. It offers so much. I've been using it lately to explore space and to use Google Earth in all kinds of ways. But it's being used in hospitals to help, when kids are going through really painful procedures, to help like put them in another world and to make it possible for them to be distracted. You can learn in an immersive way, something like that, and you retain so much more knowledge via learning inside VR. In age homes, it's being used to help people go outside and take a walk. It has potential like you wouldn't believe. But if Mark Zuckerberg steers it and drives it, it'll just be the toilet at McDonald's, as opposed to the Library of Alexandria on acid, right? It could be fantastic.
That's a
VR must be defended against Facebook.
I will say this though, there are two revelations from the Facebook papers that sort of stuck out at me for opposite reasons. And I'd be interested to know your take on both of them. One, actually, you've already mentioned. I'm about to rubbish it, but there's one like the story about the Instagram being bad for girls, which got so much media coverage when it came out. That to me actually was an example of poor reporting from more than Facebook. I'll tell you why, because I looked at that leak, and because I was interested, and what they're referring to is a survey which a bunch of boys and girls took. It was a self-reporting survey about how they felt Instagram made them feel, either more like something or less like something. They were going through various problems and then saying, does this make it better or make it worse? Now, as you say, I do like to read out strings of numbers. I'm going to read you every single one. I jotted them all down. These are the 12 different categories plus the net results. As in, if it's a plus, that means it made it better by that amount over how much it made it worse. So let's say 50%, say it's problem X, where 50% said it made that problem better, Instagram, and 40% said it made that problem worse, that'll be plus 10. Okay? All right, now I'm going to read out the strings. Here we go. Problematic use. Boys plus 15, girls plus 2. Anxiety. Boys plus 37, girls plus 29. Social comparison. Boys plus 36, girls plus 22. Sleep issues. Boys plus 28, girls plus 14. Fear of missing out. Boys plus 46, girls plus 12. Family stress. Boys plus 37, girls plus 47. Eating issues. Boys plus 34, girls plus 6. Loneliness. Boys plus 46, girls plus 39. Financial stress. Boys plus 44, girls plus 38. Sadness. Boys plus 50, girls plus 49. Self-injury. Boys plus 45, girls plus 4. Body image. Boys plus 23, girls minus 10. That was the one that got reported. The girls minus 10. 22% of girls said body image, Instagram made it better. 32% said Instagram made it worse. Now, you can not care about. You can think personally. I don't put a lot of credence in self-reporting anyway. Because I just think, you might be kidding yourself, whatever. Yeah, you could be undermined without realizing it. But the news gave credence to this. They gave it big time. The fact that there were 12 items, and for girls and boys, so that's 24 data points. There was one negative one and 23 positive ones. And they went with a negative one out of the 24 to report big time, going, Instagram hurts girls. I just thought, that's some bullshit reporting. And if people hadn't done what I did and actually looked at the actual leak, which basically no one did, because it was, it was reported and all the rest of it.
Because the fact is, Chaz, patriarchy hurts girls, right? Patriarchy hurts girls. And Instagram is a great amplifier of patriarchal norms. So it would make sense that you could point to lots of things that hurt girls. Like it's not necessarily one thing. But does Instagram, amplify it? I think another thing to do with these files that's worth noting is that Frances Haugen took photos of screens. And so she didn't do a Snowden and have a lot of documents that could be easily looked through. It makes that people, like, often the reporters, when they're not showing you like the actual documents, which sometimes you cry out for WikiLeaks, because like there's constantly like, well, show me what you're talking about. Like, why can't you? Where's the link? Why can't we see it? So one of the Gizmodo folks, Del Cameron, said the reason we can't show them to you is because they're photos, and they're photos of screens, and so it's not easy to kind of dig down into the detail. So was that a photo of a screen that you saw when you were reading out those numbers, or was it a document?
It was a PDF.
There wasn't that many documents. It was a PDF.
Yeah, it was a PDF. Yeah. So
of a full study or just a slide?
It was about 18 pages. So I think it was.
So you got a full study.
Yeah, okay. Full study. Yeah, and look, and I just want to say, I'm not
Did you
defending
read the text
Instagram. Sorry?
Go on.
No, I'm not defending Instagram. I actually don't like Instagram. I only use it as a snack review. I review snacks on my Instagram. I'm not into photos. So I don't like Instagram. And I could totally believe that Instagram is bad for girls or boys or whatever. I'm just saying that I felt like fair reporting of that leak should have said the lot. Well, it should have at least given an indication that there was a lot more than that one data point that they all just honed in on and just made out as if it was the entire thing. So that was it for me, an example of not great reporting. On the other hand, there were others where I thought, wow, this is a real worry. And the one which really stood out at me, which you haven't mentioned, so I'll be interested to know what your take on it was I forgot on which publication ran this, because they all ran different leaks. Yep. One of them was ran a leak about a fake account that was run by Facebook, a fake conservative. They ran their own internal tests where they made up a woman called Carol Smith, and she signed up describing herself as a politically conservative mother from Wilmington, North Carolina, who was interested in politics, parenting, and Christianity, and she followed Fox News and Donald Trump. And within 2 days, she was recommended to join QAnon groups. She didn't tweet. She didn't post anything to suggest that. She just sat there, and that was the recommendation that was sent to her. She didn't follow this fake person didn't follow the recommended QAnon groups. But regardless, within 1 week, her feed was full of groups and pages that violated Facebook's own rules, including of hate speech and discrimination. That was when someone had made no effort whatsoever to look out for those sites. That was just, they say they're a conservative, that's what they're sent.
And that's what they can control. They can control this algorithm, right?
Yeah.
And they can turn it up and turn it down. And a while ago, like a bunch of European legislators wrote to them saying, we are being driven to actually come up with more conservative and more extreme policies in order to get our material actually, visible on your platform. And it's your algorithm has changed. In 2018, this changed. And they noticed like it was much more extreme. So Facebook can control this. Facebook can control this recommendation kind of function. Facebook can actually assert its own standards a lot better. But what we actually need, Chaz, is not more Facebook control or redemption. Like, we need more public parks on the internet. The internet is this privatized space, and a bit like public libraries, we need some space on the internet that's actually like the national broadcaster. It's owned by the people. It's a place where we can actually freely exchange, and our data is not sucked into like advertising. It actually there needs to be more like a kind of, the internet is now so embedded into our lives, into governance, into transport, education, science, finance, everything. It's the fucking nervous system of our planet. And it's in completely private hands. We need to actually create some global commons corners of the internet where we can have much more control. A lot more of the initial visions of the internet, folks like Julian, the cypherpunks and others. You know, the internet is a decentralized platform. It's inherently decentralized, but it's become more and more centralized through these platforms, through like 2/3 of the planet being on Facebook. That is not an actual like use of the decentralized potential of the internet. And so we need to re-decentralize the internet and unleash the creativity that we could have if we weren't all staring at these platforms that are employing armies of engineers to grab our attention and to addict us to these platforms.
Isn't the problem though, Flick, that like when you're talking about the mass, the decentralized mass of the internet, it exists. We just can't find it without Google and without Facebook and all that. Like they're like, if you're talking about a portal which isn't owned by Mark Zuckerberg, which helps you find these things, then it becomes centralized again. Like isn't the problem that the internet, like the greater internet, is decentralized? We just can't find it, and because it's decentralized, and as soon as you make it easy to find, that becomes a new centralized location.
There's infrastructure, like hardware and software solutions to this. And what was so exciting after the Snowden revelations is that the Brazilian government, Dilma Rousseff, said, we need to recast the compact that the internet's based on. And so she called this thing called the Net Mundial. So later on that year was the big soccer match in Brazil. And so here was this big ideas fest for how we could change the internet. And amazing ideas came forward. And the Americans came and stomped on them. The Five Eyes came and stomped on them and said, no. No, we won't have any change. And America owns the domain name system. So Californian law is how Italy gets .il and how Israel gets .is. Like the internet is still owned by Californians, and it shows, right? Another thing that Sulet Dreyfus, really a genius, said a while ago was, look, the internet is, about 25, 26, social media is about 14 or 15, and doesn't it show? And our ability to think about the internet as it's truly become, it's only been since 2013. So it's really, it's a pre-teen. We're only just children in grappling with the reality of this situation. There's all kinds of ways that we could change the hardware and the software and these platforms, but we have to start regulating them. And Europe has, in its data privacy platform, it has started to change who gets to keep what data. Like, technology companies are just absorbing data because they can, because data is the new oil, and the whole analysis of surveillance capitalism and the need for us to break up these companies, it's coming. So like Zuckerberg's, he's not long for this world in the way that he inhabits it, I say.
Sure. Maybe you have to sneak off to his meta world. Before we if you have anything else to say about Facebook, please do. But I just want to ask one question. It's just completely unrelated, really, to what we were just talking about here. But it's just something I was wondering. I read an article. I'll put it in the blurb so people can see. Sorry, in the homework so people can see, which suggests it wasn't much of a study. They said it was a study, but I didn't see the study part. But anyway, what they were suggesting was that there was research to suggest, which they didn't show us, research to suggest that social media doesn't make dickheads more dickheady. They're dickheads to begin with. What it does is it helps connect dickheads to everyone else a lot more efficiently. And so when we talk about like your Carol Smith situation, where she's connected to QAnon, she hasn't become a conspiracy nut because of that. She's like there are always been conspiracy nuts. This just helps them propagate their message to other people who wouldn't have known they existed. There have always been trolls. There have always been, even in the real world, there have always been just assholes who are unpleasant.
It's faster and scale. It's it's the speed and the scale.
Yeah, but do you agree that the internet doesn't create more of it? It just makes them more of a nuisance.
Look, I think it amplifies and reinforces, it emboldens and enables, and it has its own dynamic. It's not like, the conspiracy theory festival in real life would be very different to a conspiracy theory festival on the internet. People behave differently when they're anonymous, sometimes in good ways. We need anonymity to vote and to do all kinds of things in a democracy. Anonymity is not a bad thing, but people sitting behind a screen, not actually talking to people, it has created different kinds of behaviors. So I don't think it makes people into dickheads. Dickheads are dickheads, yes, but dickheads who get micro affirmation after micro affirmation, people who are led to more and more extreme material, more and more unusual detail in their particular conspiracy fetish. I think it's a new manifestation. It's a manifestation of something new, something quite else, because of that speed and scale.
Fair enough. My take, by the way, on that is, even though I presented the case from the articles, I actually disagree slightly. I think that when they're talking about, I'd love to know their research, because my gut instinct is that what they say is correct for fully formed, sensible people. I mean, not sensible, fully formed people who know what they're about. They're adults. They have some kind of self-assurance. They don't have any problems. But I think the mentally weak can get preyed upon and can get diverted into areas they wouldn't have ended up. I think it's not a surprise that all our parents are addicted to this shit, and they wouldn't have been 30 years ago, but like people who are 75 or 80, who are in decline, people who are vulnerable for whatever reason, I think are easier to reach from people who wouldn't have reached them otherwise. And I think that they are vulnerable, and they would have been vulnerable in the real world without social media. Yeah. But because this stuff is just so much more ubiquitous out there, it gets to them. It's a 100% chance it will get to them. And
it was a Facebook. It was a Facebook scandal of some time ago that they ran an experiment of how if they could make people more depressed or sad in the feed that you get, because you don't get what your friends are actually posting, you get what Facebook decides you want, and they experimented with making people sadder, because it meant, and they found that it meant that they engaged more with the content, outrage and sadness. Making people depressed actually keeps them on the platform longer than giving them happy, motivating material, because then people get off their phones and they put down their computer and they go out and do something in the world. So my call for people who are still on Facebook, was like imagine a time when you won't be, but also maybe make a commitment to anything that you post that gets people off Facebook. Takes them somewhere off the platform, into the wide, wonderful internet, or even outside, or to an actual face-to-face meeting, or something in the world, and not on Facebook. But really consider getting off Facebook and experiment. Can you get off it for a week? Can you get off it? Can you stop using all Google products for a day or a week and make it longer? And you find alternatives, and there are great alternatives out there. Don't use Google ever again. Use DuckDuckGo. I never used Google. Use DuckDuckGo. Yeah. Don't tell Google everything about you, your desires, your curiosities. Don't let them own that data about you.
Well, the ABC are going to kill me if I leave Facebook, so I won't. But anyone who's on our Facebook page knows for a fact I'm the world's worst Facebooker. I literally just put videos from our show and the odd article, and that's it. So I'm not really helping the platform much with my presence, I feel. Just quickly before we move off, I mean, we are kind of running out of time here, but I do want to, while we're talking about social media, one of the things which we missed, one of the millions of things which we missed, which I'm trying to catch up desperately over these few weeks, is Trump's new social media engine as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts of, there we go. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that one, but just briefly for those who don't know.
Completely missed it, so please tell me.
Oh, okay. Well, it's called Truth Social, which seems ironic given who's running it. And their tweets are called Truths. Now, it's actually just run they just used open source software. So it's just this feeble knockoff of all the other social media engines that are already out there. In fact, I think they've violated their license agreement potentially from this open source software. It also means it's really easy to hack. So heaps of people have come on already and hacked into it. They've posed as Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and posted pictures of pigs shitting on their testicles and stuff like that. I don't know how they didn't know that was the real Trumps, because that sounds like a dank meme to me. But anyway, it's already getting taken apart. But there's a lot of navel gazing about whether this might have a genuine impact down the road, because if Trump's there and he's just pumping the shit out of it, like we all know he's the ultimate showman, you might make something out of it. You never know. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are. I'll just tell you my thoughts.
Is he charging for it?
Is that charging?
Charging for it?
No. It's now personally, I'll just tell you. Actually, do you have any thoughts before I go on?
No, please.
That's okay. That's all right. I'll tell you my take on this. You may have something to say after that, which is I don't think it's going to have an impact. Personally, I know it's dangerous to say that when something starts, because there's a real danger I could look like a real idiot in 6 months' time. I'm not saying it won't exist. I'm just saying I don't think it's going to be massive. I don't think it's going to change the election in coming up, assuming Trump runs, because I don't think Trump's power is his message. I don't think that's his power at all. I think his messages are terrible. Like, I don't just mean I disagree with them. I mean, I don't think he's actually very fluent.
Compelling.
Or compelling. Yeah, I think that. I think they're very basic. I think Trump's power is his ability to get under the skin of people that conservatives hate. That's his power. He's a great troll. He's a fantastic troll. And the way politics is structured at the moment, that's everything. The way politics is structured in America, it's all negative polarization. So if you have the ability to make the other side hate you, not only does that give you a lot of status, but through their hate, but on top of that, that makes your side love you because they just want the other side to be angry. Yeah. And so Trump is better at that than anyone. That's his magic power. Whenever he talks, it makes liberals crazy. That's his magic power. So now, him doing it on some site that no one cares about is not going to have any impact at all. That's why Parler and Gab never went anywhere. Even though Trump didn't go there himself, they did post his messages constantly, and all the other conservatives were there as well. Didn't matter. The reason why it worked on Twitter and why Trump was just open up the lights here. The reason why Trump was such a phenomenon on Twitter is because that's where the journalists live. Yep. So he was right under their noses in their house, shitting all over them, and it drove them crazy. They couldn't let it go. They were constantly responding, they were responding through their articles, responding through Twitter. Yeah, and so I think unless they can find a way to get all the journalists to this place, it ain't going to work. Trump will go there, he'll make a splash for a couple of days, and then people just go back to their homes, which is Twitter for journalists. That's their home, and they'll just forget about it. Just like his website. I mean, the journalists are aware of the posts he puts there, but they just ignore that, most of them, because they can ignore them. When he's on Twitter, they can't ignore him because he pops up in their feed constantly. And so,
what's Bannon doing? Where's Bannon broadcasting?
Bannon's still doing. He's got his YouTube show, The War Room.
He hasn't been kicked off YouTube.
No. I think War Room's still going. I mean, maybe he has. Maybe I'm out of date. I don't watch him, but I know War Room is still going. I know that for a fact. Okay. But whether it's still going off YouTube or on YouTube, I'm not sure. Maybe he has been kicked off YouTube, but he's still doing War Room. I know that. At the very least, at the very least, is a podcast. That much I do know. I'm sure he'll be there on Truth Social, but I just want to say what I think this is actually about. And I'm not the only one who's saying this. People who know a lot more about finance than me are saying this, so I'm just quoting them. What I've been reading a little bit about this, and apparently there's a kind of investment where it's called a special purpose acquisition company, right? Where if you in particular there's something called a celebrity special purpose acquisition company, and what happens is if a celebrity raises a lot of capital and they take an empty holding company, they make it public in an IPO, then they can take quite a large slice of the proceeds from that IPO without
Okay, so
actually
it's just
showing.
a fundraising.
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
fundraising.
without actually having any transparency at all. And what they've said the project has been given an initial enterprise value of $875 million and a cumulative valuation up to $1.7 billion. Now, I don't think he has that money at the moment, but I imagine he's raising that money. And if he's trying to, and the celebrity gets a 20% stake with very little regulatory scrutiny. So according to those numbers, if those numbers are what they're going to hold up in court when someone inevitably takes them to court, according to those numbers, Trump can scam between $175 and $340 million with essentially no investment on his behalf at all and no effort. Even the whole thing's a disaster, even if it goes nowhere, which is obviously likely to happen.
That's perfect for him.
So yeah, so that's what I think's going on. I think it's just the way he's going to make some money over the next few years. And so that's my take on it. It's not groundbreaking. A lot of people have said that, but I just want to give you the detail.
Yeah, that's great detail. I've got one detail more I want to add about Facebook that I forgot to say that you've triggered me to say.
Yes, please.
Something that I learned in the research for this podcast was that Facebook share the same top 5 institutional shareholders with Alphabet, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft.
Oh, really?
Just in slightly different orders. Going a little further afield, Facebook also shares 4 of the top 5 biggest investors with ExxonMobil, and 3 of the top 4 with Lockheed Martin. I found that fascinating.
I mean, that is fascinating, but I suppose if you're a mega rich person, who are you going to invest in other than Facebook and Alphabet and Amazon and these massive companies? It's supposed to make sense. Do you happen to know who they were? I'm not putting you on the spot there. Do you have it written down?
No, this was in the same article that we'll put in the homework on Arena that I really encourage people to read. It's a really fascinating take on what this mega thing is that Zuckerberg's inviting us into, which is pretty scary.
Okay, and I also am going to squeeze in one more quick thing which I forgot about Truth Social, which is the funniest bit about it is the 2 most ironic rules, which you probably know about if you know anything about this story, but if not, you'll love this. Rule 20 bans excessive use of capital letters. Has anyone ever seen Trump tweet? and Rule 23 says that you're not allowed to disparage, tarnish, or otherwise harm, in our opinion, us and or the site. This free speech social media hub doesn't let you criticize the
Sounds
site.
like an assurance to Julian Assange by the Americans.
Let freedom reign. Okay, all right. Now, we've been going for a while here. We've been going for 2 hours, but I was going to get you to cover off on Afghanistan for me, but I'm feeling like we're short on time. Having said that, I can just shut up, and if there's anything you want to say about Afghanistan, or in fact anything at all, now's the time, and I will just eventually get to Afghanistan on this podcast.
No, I think we should. I think we should like at some stage in the future when there's there's going to be some developments in this AUKUS thing. This AUKUS thing is bloody. It stinks. It really stinks.
Tell me about why.
And it's linked to Afghanistan. You know, like here is this incredible humiliation in Afghanistan, right? Yeah. And then 10 seconds later, we're back. We've got this whole new idea. It's great. It's going to be fantastic. This white boys club, strange thing. This Australia, UK, US, which should be really US, UK, Australia. But then it would sound you sucker. So they wouldn't really call it you sucker. Anyway, so now it's called AUKUS. But I think when we get some more detail, because at the moment it's just like policy by announcement with television screens of Biden, Boris and Morrison. This is a really important development, or it's also just an absolute ridiculous election stunt. It's connected to military corporations and but I think it's really about a post-Afghanistan image reboot and also like the next slush fund, for the military corporations. But I reckon like we should maybe like talk about it soon.
Okay. I've just got a final thought, which has nothing to do with anything, but once again, it's one of those things that's just been sitting around while we're away, and I just want you to know, because this has really not been reported much, but it's a bit of good news. Like this is the wonks equivalent of a Shaggy Dog story. It's definitely not Shaggy Dog at all, but it's just good news. Just a nice isolated bit of good news. And that is hearing aid reform has finally occurred in America, which is, for those who have been following this story for years, they've had a ridiculous situation in America where if Trump tried to fix this, Biden's tried to fix this, they basically hearing aids are so expensive in America that only 14% of people with hearing loss use them. Right? They cost over $5,000 a pair in America, hearing aids. And they're not covered by health insurance. So only rich people get to use hearing aids in America. And one of the main reasons for that is because you must get them from a doctor or a specialist, even though it's completely unnecessary. And like an audiologist would be totally fine. Like even over the counter, just put the hearing aid on. It's not that hard. Now they're going to be sold over the counter. It took the FDA 6 years to get the regulations going for this to happen. As I said, Obama tried it, Trump tried it, and Biden tried it. Now it's finally happened. So hopefully over the next few months, the prices are going to at least cut in half, if not a lot less than that. And maybe everyone in America can start using hearing aids if they have hearing loss.
That is such a great news story. I lived in the States for 9 years. I lived in New York for 9 years. And the insight you gain into like the main reason people become bankrupt, the absolute fear of becoming ill because it does like ruin your life, that this basic fundamental healthcare isn't covered, is really scary, and US hospitals are scary when you don't have coverage. They really are, and it's a real nightmare. How wonderful! That's a great bit of news.
It is, and I'm going to talk a lot more about healthcare when we cover the bill, which eventually is going to happen, I am sure. Flick, so thank you so much for joining us 2 nights in a row. This podcast is even better than the original one. Well, it's definitely better than the original one because the original one was just static. It's
terrible.
But you've already said your Twitter handle, Flick Rubicon, yeah? Yep. Is there any other way? They won't be getting you through Facebook. Is there any other way that people can contact you, or
no, that's it. Like, I got out of Instagram after my mum died. I decided she didn't need to see where I lived anymore, so I could get off that one. So yeah, I'm just on Twitter, and I write for Arena, and I'm going to be writing a piece about the Julian situation. That'll come out on the 11th. So that will be my next bit of writing. And I'm working on my PhD, which people just love reading PhDs. So that'll come sometime next year.
If you send me a message when that comes out to remind me, I'll put it in the homework and I'll tell people about it so they can have a look at that piece. And Flick promised me, Flick actually sent me an email with about 1 trillion links. We've covered a couple of them, but if there's any other ones that you think, Flick, I'll put them in the homework. Have a look in the homework. This is going to be a link-heavy homework this week, so there's plenty for you to read. Thank you so much, Flick. And I'll see all the rest of you peppers on Friday. Dr. Dave, I believe, is going to be back. He's pretty keen. He's got a lot to say. So, see you folks then. Thanks, Flick. Bye-bye.